Yeah, we're live. It's 6:54 and I'm not on timeout. Well, the night's still early, Tom, so you know how that goes. We're live. Tonight we're talking about stack injection. If you have not seen the video that I put up on the small block Chevy stack injection, I've also run that same thing, not just from a Speedmaster. We've run a lot of the Speedmaster stuff, but also what we call the classic fuel injection. I'll show you what's going on with that too, because it's kind of cool. It uses what look an awful lot like Weber DCOE carburetors, but they're not. The injectors are housed inside, so all of the electronics portions are inside. And it's pretty cool because they actually look like the old Weber style deals, but it's actually throttle body injection. But it does the same thing basically. It's an individual runner, individual throttle body injection. It's just that the injectors are kind of hidden, so it looks pretty neat. And I'm pretty sure, and I would like to try this because I don't think that we ever did when I was doing stuff with those guys. I would like to run them as side drafts, because then you could run like I always wanted to do when I had my 260Z back in the day, and now I have a 240. But I always wanted to run side drafts on it, which I did on my car. But I always wanted to blow through them, so I always wanted a turbo and never did it. But a turbo blowing through those would be awesome, because you get plenty of, because you're blowing the fuel in before the port basically, so you're getting some charge cooling. Also, because they look cool, because they're side drafts, and every inline six owner needs to have side drafts on it. So they look good, and then you can run an intercooler with that, and all of that would be good. So we only ran them usually as down drafts on Fords and Chevys and stuff. And I think that we could run them as side drafts as well. They look pretty cool, because obviously the fuel injection doesn't care that you tip it up on its side. It's pretty cool. But I ran the stack injection on the Chevy on this test from the guys at Speedmaster, and it's a really good looking setup, as I mentioned a number of times in the video when I was arguing with myself about carburetor sizing. And off on as a tangent, we'll talk about that a little bit. Because the reason I did that is because I get that all the time when I'm running a motor, whatever it is, like the 390 horsepower Cadillac. Oh, that's got to have a 950 on it. Well, it has less than 650 CFM worth of airflow, but it needs a 950. Same thing with the Buick. Buick's got to have a big carburetor. Those Buicks like them, because if it says Buick on it, then it likes a big carburetor. If it says Cadillac on it, it likes a big carburetor, and all of that's fantastic. And I could go into a discussion on why that bigger motor could use a bigger carburetor, and why it would work better than a smaller motor of the same power output with the bigger carburetor down low, because it's making more average power basically. But does it need that to make that power output? No, probably not. That's what I was arguing with myself. And it was just on a mild 350. But it's a good comparison doing our typical dual plane thing, because that's kind of the 90% of the time we recommend a dual plane intake for any kind of a street small block Chevy. This one had RHS heads, racing head, surface heads on it, aluminum heads, and a mild camshaft, the 276 cam. It was a Vortec bottom end, and just a motor that we had gotten from the wrecking yard, and just upgraded the camshaft basically on the bottom end, and put the heads and intake manifold on it. And we ran that, and it worked out very well. Using the upgrading to the RHS heads allowed us to run this stack injection, because it was a conventional style cylinder head and not the Vortec head. So we didn't need a specialized intake manifold for those particular cylinder heads, because they were not a Vortec specific combination. We had a Vortec specific dual plane intake, but I don't know that they had a Vortec specific stack injection for it. But it worked really well. And as we saw in the video, it not only did it look really good, because this particular one was painted. I don't know if they all come that way or not. I've seen lots of them that are polished and stuff. The stacks were polished. And as I mentioned in the video, I've seen guys even chrome plate them and gold plate them back in the day when that was all very popular. But I can't imagine gold plating stuff on your motor. You'd have to have a lot of money to throw away. But my question is, and this is the question that I introduced in the thumbnail and the intro of this video, is if we have that stack injection, one of the common questions I get on the stack injection is, okay, now let's see it under boost. Okay, that's a common response to everything that we do. Okay, here's a camshaft that we put in. Great, let's see it under boost. Here are spark plugs that we ran. Great, let's see them under boost. Whatever the thing is, how do those heads work under boost? How does that stroker work under boost? How do all of these things work under boost? So same thing with the intake. That's not surprising. But my question is, if we did configure the stack injection, any stack injection for boost, what would happen? What would be the result? So what do you guys think? What do you think that the result would be? One thing we know for sure that's happening is that we have the stack injection, and the reason that it works one of the reasons it works very well is because it's an individual runner deal. Now, if we put a common plenum on it, does it still stay? Is it still really classified as an individual runner intake anymore? Now that it has a common throttle body, even though we're using the throttle openings in the runners and not in the common plenum, we're using the blades down low. Is it still classified as an individual runner intake? So what makes that? Is it the fact that we have blades in each of the runners? Or is it the fact that it's not merged by common plenum? Here are the things to think about when we're talking about that. One is that if we apply a common plenum to our stack injection, it's no longer an individual runner intake manifold. It will no longer behave as an individual runner intake manifold. It will now behave as a common plenum manifold, meaning we will introduce Helmholtz resonance to this system because it now has a common plenum that joins all of the runners. So it will act accordingly. It doesn't matter that we have throttle blades down in the runners, as opposed to having a throttle blade opening, a big single throttle blade opening into the plenum. That doesn't matter. It's still going to resonate at a given frequency, and it doesn't matter when the blades are open. It's going to act like a common plenum manifold. So that's one thing. The other thing to think about, and this is something I don't totally have an answer to. Maybe we can talk about it here tonight. One of the things that people say about individual runner manifolds, especially ones that have blades inside the runners, is that there's a lot better response. And I was thinking about that. If the runner length is the same, and we now have a common plenum, which now this is a common plenum manifold design, does it act the same? Do we have a change in response rate from having the throttle body like in the front of the plenum, if you think about like a Holley high ram, have it there instead of having 8 blades, 1 in each of the runners? Now, here are some things to think about. If we have a single blade, like a 92 millimeter, 102 millimeter throttle body on our high ram, and we're opening the blade up, everything on the engine side of the blade is going to be a depression. It's going to be under vacuum until we open the throttle body, and then it has to all fill up, and then that's our response rate. Whereas with the individual butterflies, we only have there's a shorter distance that has vacuum basically. It's from the blade down to the valve basically. So we have a shorter, however much runner that is where the blade is, and everything above that, including most of the runner and then all of the common plenum, that's no longer under vacuum. So will we have better throttle response? And that's one of the things that people talk about with individual runner manifolds. That's why BMW uses those a lot on their inline 6-cylinders, at least on all the high performance versions of them. The real high power output NA versions, they almost always have individual deals. And if you see, most race cars and stuff, they're like that. Would we still see that? Would we still see that under boost? If we join our IR manifold with a common plenum and then add boost to it, are we going to have like snappier throttle response because we have a shorter distance from the valve that's opening the throttle blade to the valve, to the intake valve? What do you guys think? Let me know. I'm not sure. I think yes. I think that we would improve throttle response by shortening that distance. I think that the time to getting airflow would improve. So I think throttle response would improve. I'd really like to see that test done like on a chassis dyno, where you go from, let's say, idle to wide open throttle. What is the response rate? And obviously, you got to tune all that in too. It's got to be tuned so that it has the right air fuel and the right timing and the right accelerator pump, essentially, if you're going to do something like that. Because when you open the throttle immediately that quickly, you know, you need a big squirt of fuel. You have to do all that stuff. But does the air getting there sooner improve throttle response? So let me know what you guys think. I do know that, as I said, that when you put a common plenum with all that stuff, one thing it does that I didn't like, and I talked about this with putting the filter systems on there too. Like the guys at West Tech run a lot of trophy trucks there on the chassis dynos. They tune them before they go out and race in these big races. And most of those or a lot of those are stack injection. And they're stack injection, but with a big common box above the stack that they can then have a massive like flat filter to feed them. So now I don't know with a box like that and an open filter like that, if that's going to act now as a common plenum manifold rather than an IR. I just know that they do it because they want the power output that the IR does. They also, because of where they are off-road in just, you know, obviously a tremendous amount of dirt and debris, that they need to have super filtration on those things. And so that's very important. And that setup, the way that they have it, works pretty well. And on that instance, I don't know if it converts it into a common plenum. That's something that I talked about with the guys at TWM way back when I was doing the testing on my B-Series Honda, is that we ran a stack injection on it. And that's the one that I tested, putting the injectors, moving the injector placement, putting it in front of the air horns. And then I even made the slider so that we can adjust the nozzle position relative to the air horn. We could adjust it in and out and find out if that made any difference. Basically, having the injector way out in front of the air horn improve power as we would expect it to, because it's farther away now from the valve. There's more time for charge cooling. All of that was a benefit. And it was a pretty solid gain. It was very impressive. But what TWM offered for that, Admiral, what's up? What TWM offered for that stack injection was an enclosure and a single opening, you know, an opening that's, I don't know, let's say it's 75 or 90 millimeters, whatever it is. It's big enough for that little B16. But if we enclose that, and we're still not putting a throttle body in front of it, the throttle is still, we still have individual throttle blades. But, and I remember asking him that, I said, well, if you enclose that, is it going to change the power is always the big question. Is that going to hurt power or help power? What's it going to do? And my question was, now is it going to act more like all of the other Honda manifolds? I mean, it's going to be different because it's a different length and it's a different diameter and that stuff. But is it now going to act like a common plenum manifold? Basically, was my take. And I never got a solid answer from them when we were talking about that. But I think that it would. So that's our discussion. That's our discussion for tonight. That's me ranting and raving for, I don't know, to 10 or 15 minutes. Let's see. I have a fun test for you, Richie. Do 4 single barrels make more power than 1 4-barrel? It makes sense in my head, but I don't know. So you want to do, but do you have to change the manifold to do that though, right? I mean, if you have a manifold that accepts 4 1-barrels, that's going to be a different manifold design than one that accepts 4 barrels. Or do you want to have the same opening and just put 4 1-barrels on it? And then are the size of the 1-barrels the same flow rate as the individual holes that are in the 4-barrel? I mean, there's a lot of stuff to consider there. Can you do a restrictor plate dyno? I want to see if it affects the torque and still carry the same maximum RPM even though the horsepower falls off. It will still rev. We've done 2-barrel motors, so we know that 2-barrel versus 4-barrel motor. So that's kind of a restrictor plate motor. And we know that with the same manifold and stuff, it still carries out. It just doesn't, it makes less power, but it'll still RPM. Would the velocity stacks really be that effective in a boosted situation? Yes, the velocity stacks, I think as Tim mentioned, that the velocity stack still does the same thing. It's still part of the intake design. It has a radius air entry, which is good, which adds airflow. But the other thing that it does is it's the start of the runner length. So that's not going to change. That doesn't change with boost. And the other thing that a radius air entry does that, like a stack does, is the taper in the stack basically, or the radius, changes the initiation of that reflected wave. Are there any faults or drawbacks to the Speedmaster manifold? The only thing that I don't like the way that they did their TPS assemblies. And also, and this is kind of a slight on any of these setups, is it's oftentimes hard to get the blades synced so that they all work the same at very low throttle angles. So like at idle and part throttle stuff, when you're just tipping in, it's hard to make them so they all, like if you need 1 or 2% TPS, it's really hard to get them all to do that. Taller, like a Hilborn stack, works great. The stack length is going to affect where the manifold, just like any runner length, it's going to affect where the manifold is effective. So the longer the runner, the lower the engine speed. Admiral, yeah, I don't know if it's because you want to make EFI as good as a carburetor, but you want to introduce fuel farther away from the valve. If you could do that, you get charge cooling. That's what a carburetor is doing. A carburetor is also doing it usually on a different manifold. You can run, if you run a dual plane manifold and you run a carburetor on it, and then you swap that over for a throttle body injected carburetor where it's injecting fuel into that same manifold, if that setup works well, you can get the same kind of power that you get from the carburetor. Eastern Montana's in the house. So your internet quit, and it could have been on our side too. My internet connection's not very good. Vern, I already did the same test on the Ford. As a matter of fact, if you look on the channel, there's probably at least one of the Ford tests already up there. I think I did the test on the Speedmaster stuff on the Ford. You can see me looking through the stacks. That photo is probably up there. It might be might be the thumbnail for it. But I have not put up the CFI stuff where they were the throttle bodies, where the injectors were inside the what looks like a Weber carburetor. I know, where's the pizza at? I could use pizza tonight. That would be good. 8 turbos would be good. How much power per cube do you get from gold plating? You get, well, it depends. If you use 24 karat, then you get you get 24 horsepower per cube. Does GT rear-wheel drive RB25 Skyline have individual throttle blades? My RB25 does not, but I don't know what it came out of. Let's see. Somebody answered that though, I think, right? On my GTIR, the throttle response is awesome. My RB25 has a single entry manifold, and it's mounted in the center of the manifold, which I like, the center of the plenum. But I'm going to test it against the Grady style one to see what happens. Rex, you're number 2. Come on, what's up with the likes? That GTIR Pulsar is really cool. Turbo 32 coupe. I run 8 stacks on a 452 cubic inch Ford FE. Makes 600 foot-pounds of torque. Up 50 from the Victor intake and the Holly 850. Max horsepower is about the same. I did a test with Robert Pond on a stroker like that, and with this kind of stack injection, but it was the CFI one, like I was talking about, with the Weber looking things on it, and it worked really well, and it made pretty good power. How does idle air control work on the stacks? I don't know if they had idle bleeds or not. I don't remember. For us, it's not really a concern because we don't care that much about it. We can idle it at 1,000 RPM. It doesn't matter for us. But I can't remember if they were I think that they had screws on them that just open the blades. The Aussie V8 touring cars run 8 drive-by-wire throttle bodies. Wow. Admiral, why did you stop paying attention? I did answer your question. I think pro stock anyways. It's literally what we do for a living. Got a big Pro Charger car, and today, speaking of which, I always love Pro Charge, big Hemis. Boost always helps. The main advantage of stacks is to make a big cam idle like a stalker. Without a plenum, there's no vacuum to pull exhaust into the intake manifold during overlap. I haven't seen that. We have a vacuum and a map sensor source for the stack injection, and it's a common one in the manifold. They have all of them drilled into a big common opening because they're trying to get away from the pulsing. Usually the guys were taking it from one runner or running a bunch of lines into some T's and trying to combine them to get a map sensor reading, or in this case, one for power brakes. But they had that on this manifold. Have you tested? There's Dean with some pizza. Have you tested twin turbos on a Ford 460? I have not. What's your thought on direct injection? I actually really like the direct injected L83, and I talked to Brian and James at Brian Tooley Racing about doing I'm going to bring my L83 back there, and we're going to run boost on it. Need some knowledgeable inline 4 sport bike tuners. They generally use 4 IR throttle blades. I did some testing with Tom when he was there at West Tech on his bike when he was getting ready for Bonneville. We did some cool stuff standing next to it with a strobe light and a video camera to watch the injectors pulsing and watching the fuel flow down into the thing at wide open throttle. It was pretty cool, and I can see why they might be power sensitive to plenum volume in the air box, because that's going to be a common plenum. There's going to be a resonance frequency there. What about a dual 4-barrel intake with a single 4-barrel and throttle body injection on the other place? What do you think it would do? As long as it was getting the air fuel that it needed, it would still do the same thing. Just a simple V12 drag with Suzuki 1000 injectors. No boost was going to play with different stack lengths. If you look at some of the other videos I have up on the stack injection, we've played with stack length a lot. Like the Hemi one, I made a bunch of different stack lengths, and I've done that a bunch, and it works exactly the way that it does on a common plenum or a dual plenum manifold. If you change the runner length, it makes more power down low. And when I say that, sometimes it doesn't make just more power down low. Sometimes it makes more power from 6,500 all the way down, depending on your starting length of the stack and then what your ending length is. So you might run across a stack length change that improves power everywhere in the tested RPM range. So that's the optimum one. If you keep going longer than that, what will happen is you'll start making more down low, and then you'll start trading it at the top. Triple meat, triple cheese, and bacon. Nice. Carnivore. For Weber 48s would be good. Randall Burns has headers, has header software. Burns stainless. The Mazda 787B had ITB set up with telescopic runners to improve low end torque. They didn't just do it to improve low speed torque. If you see what it does to the power curve, I don't know if they were doing it. I know Formula One did it. They actually cycled those because you can get gains in other part of the RPM range. Because what's going to happen is in any effective length is going to kind of produce a sine wave. At least it has in the testing that we've done. So if you have, and even if the primary wave is the big part of the gain, and you only get a secondary one, well, if you shift that a little bit, now all of a sudden you have that little gain, but it's a little bit farther out. So you can do that by adjusting these tube lengths on the fly, which is Formula One used to do that. I'm told maybe they do it again. I know Adam LZ had an RB26 ITBs on an RB25 at one point. It would build a bar of boost just free revving. I don't know how a motor builds boost free revving with no load against it. My cam is a 248, 256 at 50 and idles smoothly at 650 RPM. So what about using a normal intake manifold but putting throttle blades in the runners and just an open port up top where it normally has the throttle body? You could do that, but that's a lot of work to put throttle blades in the manifold. That's no easy task. I'd like to see ITB's graph on something like a GT40 lower. It just seems like it should go on there, right? Because, oh, I know what's going on. I don't have my other light on. That's what's going on. There we go. Yay. I'd like to see the ITB's graph on something like the GT40 lower because they have round holes in it, so it seems like a natural for that. 8 tiny turbos. Hot messes in the house. What's up, Rich? Gene's here. Any word on the reverse piston dyno test? No word yet. Richard, build out my 351 Windsor. Just ask away, man. We got all the answers are here for you. Kyle at Boosted Lifestyle tried 8 turbos that are way too big. Each of them can make 300 horsepower. That'd be a lot. Can you do an EGT test between 8 stack carbs versus 2 4-barrel carbs? You're just going to see a big difference in intake design there. It's not going to be a 2-barrel versus an 8-stack thing. The individual runners, if you tune if you're talking about putting Webers on them on the stack injection with Webers on it, those should all be very good and should be fairly even as long as the stack length is the same. A twin 4-barrel deal like most of the ones I've seen are dual plane, but even if you did a single plane, I don't think you'd get the same fuel distribution out of that. I had Weber side drafts on my Z and drove it around all the time. Somebody left. Where did everybody go? It's Friday night, I guess. Maybe I shouldn't do a Friday night one anymore. Yeah, the 8 turbo stuff is cool and as a G-Wiz thing, but I don't think it's effective as for actually making power. I salute them for doing it because that's awesome, and the internet wants to see stuff like that. What I wanted to do was do a Y pipe in the front with a bunch of provisions for turbos that are capped off, and then just start adding turbos, add them one at a time, and see what happens. Because then we can have, you know, the turbos that I would use would probably be, it might be similar to what he was doing. They would be little ones, but obviously a single turbo or a twin turbo, we might start out with 2 of them so that we have enough turbo to just feed the motor. But then if we added them one at a time, then we could get to the point where it didn't want to spool those up anymore, or it wasn't beneficial, or it was just too problematic. That might be interesting. No spinning. I'm going from round pipe to 1x8 rectangular box for the hot side for ground clearance. We run oval tubing on exhaust a lot for ground clearance. Why does a cathedral port go from round to square to round and flow so good, yet we rarely do? I don't think you have to worry about that on the hot side. The Ford Godzilla is a good engine. I just haven't done anything with it. (1014) or 1054 turbo Windsor 351 with TFS heads. That's a good combination. The one that I ran didn't need better rods. It needed a better person at the throttle control. I think I'm going to do the reversing piston on the Dodge on the 360. Not a ton of tunnel ram EFI intakes for big blocks. I agree. John, 1.5 horsepower per cubic inch with a 460 is possible. It's just that you're going to need a lot of cylinder head to do it, because the bigger that you make the motor, the harder it is to get that, because you need a cylinder head that's going to flow that, and it might not be that you find a Windsor head. That being said, there's lots of heads that you can make 700 horsepower with out of a Windsor. Sketchy, your chats are coming through. Noodles is here. A little hydration break from Nitro RC maintenance. Nice. Replacing all wheel bearings today. I think I have a tunnel ram. I think it's an Edelbrock for a big block that's set up for EFI that we were going to run on the Big Bang motor, but I think it's for a bigger type of head. I think it's for a race head. The new 7.3 Godzilla is just a 9.2 deck small block forward with bigger internals and newer parts. An engine really worth playing with is the 8.2 deck 302 or 351M. It's difficult to put 4 throttle bodies on a 351 Windsor to get 8 stacks with 2 throttle bodies. I will boost it and tell you what happens. Cool. Pizza's in the You have a video explaining I can watch an intake snout before the throttle body. For example, is there a normal length of intake tube? An LS with a map tune. Are you worried about the position of the mass air meter or something? What is it you're worried about? Are you talking about a boosted one, or is this an NA one? Does anyone set the big block Chevy in an S10? I'm sure somebody had to have done it. Wendell, you didn't miss anything. It's all good. Tim, what is your question? I don't use wave tuning. I don't use that term. I use reflected wave because that's just the way that I learned it. Because that's what's happening. The wave is reflected. It goes up and is reflected back. Yeah, 700 horses out of a big block Ford's not a problem, but he's talking about a 460 small block Ford. Dual boom tubes from Dr. Gas on a twin turbo setup, 2-inch back pressure. I don't know what boom tubes are. I guess maybe I'm not cool. Is that a kind of muffler or something? Can you do a 6.8 liter V10 with 60 over pistons versus a V8 427 on the dyno? Equal max RPM. I'm interested in the well, you have an awful lot going on there that you're not worried about. It's not going to be a max RPM thing or even a displacement thing. Can we get the same head flow? Can we get the same cam timing? Can we get the same intake manifold? Those are the things that make the power. Have you ever done any small block Ford Yates headed stuff? I haven't. That's usually out of my price range. That's high dollar stuff. But a Yates head is like a really, really good Cleveland head, and they flow a ton, and obviously they can make a ton of power. Cross ram, 48 millimeter throttle body, stroke 215 Buick, TA Performance. That sounds like a good combination. Wendell, I try to read every comment. I can't answer everyone because there's just not time for me to do that. And if I did, then I would never get through the comment section. I think I would be more concerned if I was running the V10 about just running the V10, about getting it running, and I probably would make an intake. Big block Ford, Big Bang. I've never tried that. I need to get the Big Bang Chevy going first. So is this your first? You must be your first time here. I've told the story a bunch. Have you ever worked with fuel injectors that are outside the individual throttle body trumpets? Yeah, the video's up. Take a look at the Honda video. That photo, the was probably that. So I used the ITBs from TWM on a B-Series Honda, and then I made a slider assembly to mount the injectors in front of the air horns. And I made the slider assembly so I could adjust where they were relative to the air horn. And putting them out in front of the stack definitely makes power. Like to see a stack versus a Hawaiian tunnel ram, big block Chevy. Our Ford V10 is prone to cylinder wear. I don't know. I've never even taken one apart. Tim's right about the crankshaft. That seems to be the concern with big power stuff anyway. Let's see. Can you do a 4.6 valve dyno with Ford Racing Power Parts top end kit, ported heads, tunnel ram, intake, camshafts, throttle body, cold air, and tune? Can you maximize the kit out of the box versus stuff like tune headers? I've run 3-valve testing, but on the engine dyno, we wouldn't have any of that stuff. We wouldn't have their tune. We wouldn't have a cold air. We could run their throttle body, I suppose. I think we ran a manual one when we ran it because we weren't doing drive-by-wire. The other thing I couldn't do back then when we ran it was we weren't running variable cam timing. We just had fixed cam timing on it. But we did run. I made an intake manifold for it. We ran a Vortec and a Paxton, and we ran turbos on it, a single turbo or twin turbo. I think we ran twins. We did try ported heads. It didn't seem to gain much power. Any chance of a 408 stroker with a 360? I think eventually that is where it would go. I have not tried Liberty heads. We need to run a modular V10 with a Viper crank and firing interval. Sure, I'm sure it just drops right in. I have a 347 putting out 538 horsepower of the crank and a 65 Mustang. Thinking about reducing the cam. 320 intake and 280 exhaust. That seems like a big difference between the two. I want to make it more streetable. Give me the specs at 50 on that camshaft, Dave, and give me the lift and the LSA, and I can kind of steer you in the right direction there. What cheap motor surprised you with how much of a beating it took? The first 4.8 Big Bang motor was the one that was probably the most surprising. $3,000 horsepower Vipers, that would be a lot. I don't think that the factory Magnum heads are that good. They're good, relatively speaking. Like they're better than a 351 Windsor Ford head, probably, than a stock one, like an E7TE head. I don't think that they're as good as a Chevy Vortec head, but I'd like to see some back-to-back, at least airflow numbers, because we can't obviously do back-to-back dyno testing. I don't know if I have a personal test. My personal favorite is the next one that I get to run, because that's usually the one that I'm most excited about. Would we ever see a Z-Tech Big Bang like a Focus Z-Tech motor? Probably not. But we did make over 500 with one of those at the tire, and I know that that's not anywhere near what's possible. That was actually a fairly simple setup. Our problem was getting we had to borrow a Pectel management system to get it tuned. And then, you know, you have to worry about things like clutches and tires and axles and redoing the fuel system. And all that stuff would make it would be a lot easier to do that on the engine dyno. Best head for a turbo 306 small block Ford, 11R 170, 11R 190, or an AFR 165. Street car looking for. If you're only looking for 600 or 700 horsepower, any of those heads would do double that. So you just pick the one that you want. All of those are good. Mark's here. Matthew, I don't know enough about the FE motors. I know that I've heard people that you could take a 360 and go out to 390 in it, but I thought that there was a difference in the blocks, though. I thought that something was going on there, that there was a reason guys didn't want to. I don't know if the high pressure direct injection, if that would actually help charge cooling over a regular injector. And if it did, I don't know how much. I mean, obviously the droplet size is going to be smaller and stuff. Maybe there's more surface area, but I don't know how much more we need. Like, I don't know how much extra cooling is left when we're doing it that way. Wouldn't ITBs just act like changing runner length? The individual throttle bodies, after the blade is open, it's just the manifold. The manifold is just a given runner length and a plenum volume, same as every other manifold. So once they're out of the way, my question was, since they're closer, you might get this initial hit a little bit quicker. You know, it might hit the converter, hit the converter harder. I'm still processing how a big air box on ITBs changes resonance. Well, everything that you have in the motor has a resonance frequency. So think about it like a drum, Beagle. Think about it like a drum. If you hit a small drum, it makes a noise. Okay, if you look on the backside of the drum, that's a resonance frequency. It's this big, and you hit it, and you've excited it, and it makes a noise. If you hit a bigger drum, it makes a different noise. That pressure wave, that resonance frequency is different. Same thing happens in your box. What happens is when we excite it, it resonates. It goes wah, 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 like that. And the size of the box determines that resonance frequency. And that resonance frequency are pressure waves that, if they're timed correctly, can go down and improve cylinder filling. So the size of it is going to determine when that wave happens and how often, and then when it arrives and whether it helps or not. Because the other thing that can happen is it can go down as another negative pressure wave is coming up. They can cancel each other out. There's all kinds of things that are happening there, but that's what's happening with the size of the airbox. Or a plenum volume, or a kegladon, if you happen to make a kegladon. Pretty interesting comparison would be a 346 pack versus a 5.9 Magnum and a mild cam. I want to do the Little Red Express engine versus the 346 pack. The 360 low compression, but a good head and a good induction system and stuff, and more displacement, versus the 340 with higher compression and the same camshaft. Z-Tech and Duratech is definitely better than EcoBoost. Can you have individual throttle bodies and still use turbos? Yes, no problem. Go 5.9 flip pistons, 2 horsepower is going to win me a race. I honestly hope it does something. Yes, the Kegladon video is a good one to reference if people are talking about throttle body spacers. But you got to get the throttle body spacer with the little twisted screw design in it, because that, swirls the air in, and that swirl continues all the way through the plenum, and the swirls break off into individual smaller swirls, and they swirl down in past the valve into the combustion chamber, and they swirl in the combustion chamber and induce swirl, and then that adds more power, right? What I want is I want to send Cletus the Keglodon, and I want him to put it on one of his, the external Corvettes or whatever that he runs, and actually see it go down and run on the track. I think that would be awesome. In your experience, in which head will allow more cam timing lift on a stock bottom end, the AFR 165? Probably the TFS. Usually the twisted wedge stuff allowed a little bit more cam timing. But if you're trying to maximize the cam timing and lift, you shouldn't be worried about that. If you were talking about the power levels that you were talking about, that having a big cam in it shouldn't be your answer. You got way more cylinder head than you need. You could do what you're doing with stock heads. So any of those heads with a small cam like the 274 on down, you could even run a 258 or 252 or 262, 268, whatever they are. You put those camshafts in them, any of the letter cams that fit, all of those will easily make 600 or 700 horsepower with boost. See, now you know how to do the swirl conversation. Swirl is actually a good thing. The swirl from the throttle body spacer doesn't do what I just explained. Family time, go get them. I have a 360 that I copy the Little Red Express engine, except mine's 10-to-1, and that probably I think a 10-to-1 version of that motor would make more than the 346 pack motor. The thing I don't know is about the 8.5-to-1 version. The geometry says flip piston change the curve will change the curve more with a short rod. It will actually add a fraction of a degree of power. Geometry says flip piston change the curve more with a short rod. Okay, so I don't know what your definition of short and long is. How important is it to degree a cam for daily driving? In all of the cam testing that I've done on all the LS stuff, I never degree them. So that's how important it is to me. Oh gosh, here we go. Now we have to adjust the cam timing. I'm not going to adjust anything. The only thing I'm going to do is change the piston. I'm going to flip the piston and see what that does. So now I have to put an adjustable cam gear on it to adjust the camshaft. Hot mess is out. Pouring slabs. Swirls. I blame swirls. Give them the swirly. Friday night doesn't seem to be too popular of a night to do the live feeds. We didn't have a lot of people, but you know what we got? We don't have quantity, but we got quality. It would be a lot of work, but I would be interested in seeing cam degree. I have done that. I think I did that on a small block Ford and a small block Chevy. We did it the easy way because we had an external belt drive with an adjustable gear so that we could change the cam timing. And I'd have to go back and look through the data and see what happened. And a lot of degreeing the camshaft is going to be application specific. Like what cam are we starting with and where is it starting out relative to what engine that we want? Like, is it already, let's say it's already, relatively speaking, in an advanced position. It's already effectively advanced. So when we advance it, it may do nothing. When we retard it, it may do something. And so if we have a camshaft, relatively speaking, that's retarded, and then we advance it, then we might show something. So, every time we advance it and every time we retard it, it doesn't always do the same thing. That's not a universal thing. Dean Stevenson. So we have royalty. My ancient forefathers invented cement. Nice. How are we changing the cam position by 9 crank degrees? Are we changing it by 1 tooth? Can you do a roller cam and timing chain versus a flat tappet timing gears? Oh, you want to just do it for sound? So you want to do a gear drive, basically? Is that what you want to do? Can you explain what a larger CC cylinder head does? Are you talking about the chamber CCs or the port volume? There's a, lucky for you, both of those tests are up. So there's a test where we ran a 175, a 190, a 210, and a 225 cylinder head. And so you can see what the change in port volume does. You're also getting a change in flow. And if you change the combustion chamber size, you're lowering or raising the compression depending on which direction you go. So Tim is telling Exmo you have to subscribe and click the bell icon and allow all notifications, which everybody should be doing, right? All 107 people should be doing that already. When we're doing the cam test, like on the LS stuff, I just line it up dot to dot. And the reason that I do that, or my rationale behind that, besides being just lazy and having to do 20 or 30 cam swaps, so I can't go to the trouble of degreeing every one of them, is that nobody is going, not nobody, 99.9% of the people are not going to go to the trouble of degreeing the camshafts. They're just not going to do it. Guys that are doing a cam swap are going to take the old cam out, they're going to put the new cam in, and they're going to hopefully put the timing gear back on right after they put in the cam retaining plate, and then they're going to put it together and run it and tune it and worry about that part of it. The only people that degree a camshaft are people that are putting the motor together usually for its first time when it's brand new outside of the car, and then you can degree it and make sure that it's right. Even when we're doing that, I don't normally degree the camshaft because I'm never building a motor for one particular purpose. If I degree the camshaft, that would be the only one that's going to get degreed because I'm going to run 10 more camshafts in it, usually more than that. And so I don't normally worry about it. If I was doing it for now we went through a lot of trouble when I'm doing the like Bonneville stuff. So in the B series Honda, we went through exhaustive testing to find out what kind of cam timing it wanted. Even going so far as to find out if it wanted different cam timing at different boost levels, which by the way, it did not. It didn't seem to make a big difference. Aluminum nutty head. Nice. What do you think about the Neutron Engine's V8? I think it's awesome. I can't wait to see it. The Illuminati didn't want you getting your ordinary education. Aluminum nutty. Do you think that the Mopar cam, basically cams designed to take advantage of the Mopar lifter diameter? I think that that's a good idea. I think that being able to take advantage of that is going to be a function, though, of what RPM range you're running and how much lift you can run and that kind of thing. So I think that becomes more critical the wilder that you get in cam timing. If you're putting a 218, 224 cam in or 218, 220 cam or something like that, I don't know that you're going to see a whole bunch there. Good for you, Vern. Can a chain-driven oil pump balance shaft assembly easily withstand 9,000 RPM? I don't know what easily withstand means, and I don't know which engine you're talking about. I think we ran the K-Series one to 8,500 I was told not to go higher than that. I didn't try it, but we were already at the power peak, so it wasn't really a concern. Phillips here. Admiral's out. 18,000 RPM at the balance shaft. I know we're supposed to take the balance shafts out, but we didn't. Ring the Liberty Bell. Do you think that there's a difference between cheap 24-pound injectors versus expensive brands? Who puts 24-pound injectors in anything? What are you running those in? What sub 400 horsepower V8 are you running those in? Yep, stacks are in the house. And JD, to answer your question, I don't know that I've ever compared them. The 24-pound injectors we normally run were all of the, I think that they were the blue top Ford ones that we normally run. I think some of the LS stuff, like the truck stuff, or some of those are also 24-pound injectors, but I don't ever remember comparing them to see if there was a variation in flow between them. And I don't think I've ever tried an inexpensive set. If there's a offshore brand or something, I don't think I've ever tried them. Uh, 9,000 RPM. If any motor exceed 9,000 RPM, should have a belt or a gear drive as a chain. Want to hold up that much pressure from the springs without breaking. If you look at, there's lots of 9,000 RPM motors running both of those. They're using them to drive the camshafts, so they have all the valve spring pressure against that, both with belts and with chains. A B series obviously runs a belt. The K series runs chains. You're driving the oil pump, with chains, and on the oil pump on the B series is driven off of the crank though. Box body with aluminum heads makes about 350 horsepower. Yeah, that's fairly common for a 302 range with any kind of decent aluminum head, a camshaft, intake manifold. My son's replacing timing chains on a GM double over cam V6. 3 change, at least 6 timing marks that have to line up at various parts of the work, and the GM shop success rate is about 50% of running it again. That's not good. That's not a good success rate. Can't remove the shafts. 2-liter new dart, the balance shafts for the oil pump. The answer to your RPM question is boost. Richard, you have a video showing accessory drivetrain, not drivetrain loss, but accessory stuff on the engine dyno we have. And then I also have another video that goes from running it on the engine dyno to running it on the chassis dyno. Silver, think about it as about 100 horsepower. From the way that we run it on the engine dyno to the way that it runs on the chassis dyno seems to be about 100 horsepower for a typical car. The problem is that, like, if you go from if you look at what the motors make on the engine dyno and what they make on the chassis dyno on a trophy truck with these gigantic wheels and gigantic rear ends and gigantic transmissions, it's going to be a lot more than 100 horsepower. 650 Demon carburetor, that's right. And was it a Mighty Demon? Porsche GT3, those are nice. How about 2 small injectors versus 1 big injector? As long as it provides the same amount of fuel, I don't think you see a difference. I'm sure spin my 392 small block Chevy to 10,300 and use a comp cam belt drive system. Yeah, that works good. That's a lot of RPM. Want to see more K24 stuff? We have that coming up. Mighty Demon. Maybe on the Godzilla motor, and I have 2 more minutes before I got to get going. You build the ultimate daily driver. What would be? I already have that. I have the truck. Again, it depends on what you want to do. I really loved my Chevy Sprint Turbo, which I was looking at another one. Somebody sent me a text, a message about somebody selling a Turbo Sprint. And I told them that I wanted it. And I think he reached out and sent the guy something. I haven't heard, he hasn't heard back from the guy, but I would like another Chevy Sprint. I really like those. That was a great daily driver because it would, the only thing else, it was really hot and didn't have AC, which was bad. And I think I would want that now. I don't think I want to be driving like I did from Vegas to out to West Tech because that was really, really hot. But I love that. I loved my Civic VX because again, it would get 55 miles to the gallon. Fireworks are pulling your crowd. I'm still here. Look. We got some right over. I got some right over here. We're prepped for tomorrow and for the 4th, because we actually get to. There's a fireworks display on the 3rd where we're going, which will be good, and then we get to do it again on the 4th. Sprint car engines are very impressive, and they make big power too. When will we see the twin charge 4V 4.6? I thought that I did that video already. We actually did that on a chassis dyno and not on an engine dyno. I should be going down. I'm trying to go down next week, Mark. And time. Thanks for showing up, everybody. Thank you, guys. Make sure to go take a look at the video that I posted on the stack injection. So now I have to do another one. Maybe we'll do another one on stack injection. People seem to like that. Maybe we'll do a Ford or something, do something different, because I've done LS and big block and all kinds of stuff. So there's lots of cool stuff. And whenever we did those tests, it worked very well. We also did a very cool one that Tom, the guy that used to work at West Tech, he made a manifold that was a cross ram for an LS. And then we mounted those Weber. Now that I think about it, we did do a side draft because those were mounted in a side draft orientation. So we did do them as side drafts. So there was 4 2 barrels basically on a side draft cross ram for the LS. But I don't know. I have to go back and look and see if I have the dyno results and the photos to be able to do a video on that. But I know I have at least one photo of it. It's very cool. Maybe if I can't find all that stuff, I'll use that as one of the thumbnails for one of these live discussions, and we can talk about that because it was really cool looking. He did a good job on the manifold, and it made really good power. It worked very well. Thank you guys for showing up. I will see you all tomorrow. And if I don't see you guys be safe out there. We want to have everybody coming back with all their fingers and all their toes.